To get started on your project today, you are going to need color pencils, scissors, pencil, a thin black marker, glue, and crayons. You may also want to find a picture of the animal that you're going to be drawing. You can look in a book. You can just get a picture on your computer. I have a badger here, and I've done a quick little sketch of the character that I want to create and kind of have a story in my head. So think about the character that you're going to create. What kind of personality is your animal going to have? I'm going to start with one white sheet of paper today, and I'm going to trim a little bit off the end of the paper, and I want a nice straight line. I'm going to save this extra little bit. It's about the size of a bookmark for part of my badger character. So just trim that off nice and straight. When I get started today, I have my badger picture and my plan sitting right here next to me so I can refer back to it. I know I need to leave some room at the top if I want to be able to fit in the umbrella and his hat. So I'm looking at the shape of the badger's head, and it's very flat on top. So I'm going to start out with just a slight curve. They have a very square face. And I'm not going to worry about the snout right now, or the muzzle. So I've almost drawn just kind of a rectangle with the, just rounded out a little bit. They have very large ears. I can see that the ears come up slightly above the head. And these will be covered in fur later, so I'm not worried about a lot of detail. So I'm just looking for all my shapes when I get started drawing something, making them the right size and putting them in the right position. Now, before I put any details on the face, I'm going to make the muzzle on this separate piece of paper because I'm going to cut it out and make it pop out. So I'm going to look at the size of the face. The size of my face is slightly smaller than the picture that I have. So I'm looking at the shape of the muzzle, thinking about what size I need to make that. And it's just two curves, kind of like parentheses. I'm going to do a curve across the top too. And the mouth is really a little bit behind. So that's the basic shape for the muzzle. When I put the nose on there, I see that the nose is pretty close to the bottom of the muzzle. And it's a very wide nose. And I always think of animal noses in two separate parts. So you can see there's a front part and then there's a top part. So when I draw this, I'm drawing it as two separate shapes. Their noses almost have an M shape to them. Now I'm going to add the top part in there, and the top part is more of a gentle curve, and it wraps around to close it up. So see if you can just kind of simplify the shapes when you're looking at your animal, or maybe you're drawing a badger. See if you can simplify the shapes and make it a little bit easier. This part of the muzzle sticks out a little bit more than the sides, so I'm going to draw myself some guidelines. Now I'm going to cut this shape out. I've cut out my muzzle, and I'm still saving my scraps because I'm going to make a spring out of this in just a little bit. Now, when I start shading this nose, I want to make sure that I'm not on my good paper. I want to be over top of like a messy paper because my marker might go through. I'm going to look, and the hair on the muzzle is very, very short. And there's almost an imaginary line right here in the middle that splits the hair. The hair on the left side goes out to the left. The hair on the right side goes out to the right. So when I start my texture, I want to make sure I'm following the direction of the hair on the face. So I'm really looking at my animal. I'm going to do a little outline here. And I'm making sure that I'm copying that hair. So under the nose is very short and it's going downward. Take your time and look at your animal. Now, one of the things that I want to do to make the sides look like they're a little farther away than the top of the nose is I'm going heavier with my thin black marker in those areas so that it's a little bit darker, and that'll give the illusion that it's further away, just using my texture. Okay, so when I put this on the paper, I know that I need to set it pretty low on the face. I just need to leave a little bit of room for the bottom lip and a very thin little chin. So I'm going to make my spring next. You're going to take your scrap paper and you're going to cut off a strip of paper. Mine's about 1/2 inch wide. Yours can be a little bit bigger if you like. I'm just going to bend it. I'm going to find the middle and I'm going to bend it into a letter L. Now I'm going to place it on my table, and I'm always going to fold forward. So this one is on bottom. I'm going to start with whatever one's on bottom. This one's always going to go side to side, and this one's always going to go up and down. So I'm going to fold this one right against the other leg of the spring. This one goes down, across, up, across, down, across. One more. Now I've got a tiny little bit of extra hanging out. If that's bothersome to you, you can take your scissors and snip it off. And sometimes I can just tear it off, or you can just leave it on there. You're going to use one little drop of glue to close up your spring. After you put that drop of glue on there, kind of make sure you don't have too much glue on there. Pull the sections apart. And this is going to hold the snout or muzzle up off of the face. So I want my spring to be attached to the bottom part of the snout here. So when I turn it over, I'm going to put my dotted glue right around the bottom of the nose. I want to make sure my spring is not showing after I place it on. So I'm going to make sure it's not over the edge of the paper. I'm going to put one dotted glue on the bottom of the spring, and I'm going to put one dotted glue right up at the top of the snout because I want the top to be attached to the face. When I hold this down, I don't have to hold it down very hard. Just holding it down for a second or two and it should be fine. Now once I have this on here, I can go back and start putting in my detail. And you can see on the Badger, we have these great black and white areas, all these grays and browns. And the eyes sit right next to the snout. So I'm going to use my snout, and I'm going to start with just a curve for the eyes. They've got these great brow ridges. I'm going to try and keep it balanced, so I'm going to put the other eye in here. Let's see, that one I made much more open, so I'm going to make little adjustments. And I'm just going to have a curved line to close it up on the bottom. Now I notice they've got some black skin around their eyes, and that's important to help me get the right shape for the eyeball. And then they have dark spots and highlights on their eyes. At first it just kind of looks dark brown, but once I look at it, there's a very big square or rectangular highlight. There's a shiny little one. There's a lighter area in there and maybe a darker area at the top. Having that in the eye instead of just coloring them black is going to make this animal look alive and make it more believable. Now looking at my picture, I'm going to start drawing in all of these stripes and kind of landmark areas and start mapping out my badger. Then I can start with the clothing, hat, and all that to make it more of a character. Okay, before I start with too much texture here on the face, I'm gonna go ahead and draw out my hat too. Now I chose a bowler hat. If your character is wearing a hat, think about how it would sit on their head. So the first thing I'm gonna think about is it's probably gonna cover up part of my ears here and the top of the head. I do have a picture behind me on my computer. I didn't print one out, but I have a picture of somebody wearing a hat. Not a badger, just a person. So I am turning around and looking at the picture, and I suggest, even if you're doing a ball cap, you grab a picture also. You can always change the hat a little bit, make it your own, but a picture is going to help a lot. I want to make the brim of the hat look like it wraps around to the back side, so I'm adding these little pieces on the side and all sorts of detail. The more detail you have, the more believable your character is. To not have a floating head here, so I'm going to come across with my shirt collar from around the back of the neck. Make sure you kind of maybe look at a picture of clothing and figure out what your character is going to wear. Certainly doesn't have to wear a tie. It's your choice. Now we're going to work on the color and the details to bring our animal to life. So for the eye, we talked about not coloring it flat. So I looked at my picture and I'm going to use my color pencils to add the color in here. The color pencils are going to allow me to keep the drawing a little bit cleaner, a little bit neater than if I were going to use crayons. And I'm remembering to keep my highlight nice and clean. Alright, now you might want to switch over for crayons when you start adding a little bit of color. I don't need to add a lot of color, but I do see some brown in the fur. So I'm just taking my crayon and I'm very lightly going over top of my areas with a little bit of brown. I might see a little bit of a darker area, so I can always add some black in there. And I'm not covering up the texture, I'm not pressing hard. I'm just kind of coloring the white paper that's in between. The front of the nose is pretty dark. A little tricky coloring that with the spring below it, but that's okay. And I'm going to color the top of the nose a little bit lighter. And I can't find, oh yeah, my gray color. So I'm going to start with my gray there and then see if I need to add any black into it for the darker areas. So use your crayon to add the color to the fur now that you've got the texture, and the texture also helped to make it look three-dimensional. As you're working on coloring the details of your character, I want you to think about those little tricks that we learned for shading, starting with a darker color around the edge and blending to a lighter color in the middle. Do those little things. If you use crayons, it's going to go a little bit faster than if you use color pencil, but it's certainly up to you which one you are more comfortable with. Don't forget to take a picture of your animal when you are all finished. You can even tell me what your character's name is. Make sure you click on the slide that I've attached to the assignment and follow the directions on the slide to turn in your project. I hope you had a lot of fun. I can't wait to see you guys in my class again. I hope it's very soon.